A lead detective who assisted the Colorado Boulder Police Department in the 1996 murder of 6-year-old pageant queen JonBenét Ramsey has officially spoken out about how poorly the investigation was handled and how local police purposely overlooked critical details and evidence regarding this case.
Well, there was a lot of evidence that supported that there was an intruder.
Was that intruder theory properly investigated?
I don't even think that it even was something that they entertained.
Considered?
No. What I can tell you with pretty good certainty was that there were at least 2,500 leads in the early part of the investigation that literally were never followed up on.
Why?
Because the tunnel vision existed from the moment the murder happened. The focus was on John and Patsy Ramsey.
And after Boulder Police sat on the case for close to 30 years, 80-year-old John Ramsey had to officially petition to the Colorado government to have the case looked at by an external agency. Thankfully, this agency is now examining the DNA that was recovered from the murder scene back in 1996. Not to mention, they are now investigating the basic and critical oversights that were made from the beginning of the case, as well as the other information that was just outright ignored because it didn't align with the police's tunnel vision of who they thought was responsible. They were cherry-picking evidence, people.
For John, these images help piece together the amateur oversights made and evidence that was completely ignored. The first hints that an intruder was in the home are found in photos of the Ramseys' basement.
Yeah, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, right, to know that this is what we call a clue, right? You got an open window, you got a scuff mark on the wall, you have a suitcase. On the suitcase is some broken glass. You can actually see some broken glass on the suitcase. So
John believes this photo clearly shows how the intruder left the house.
But more importantly, what was inside of this suitcase, Amelia, were fibers that matched what JonBenét was wearing when her body was found by her dad. Which means that at some point, potentially, her body might have been placed inside of that suitcase.
And most upsetting, the local Boulder Police Department has cast this veil of suspicion that the Ramsey family was involved in the murder in some way, specifically her father, John. Meanwhile, only 2 weeks after the murder, DNA testing confirmed that the DNA recovered from the blood-stained underwear that were found at the crime scene, as well as the DNA that was underneath JonBenét's fingernails, was not matched to anybody in the Ramsey family, and instead it identified a stranger's DNA. Police deliberately hid this for years. Had this case been investigated by specialists earlier on, I'm sure somebody would have already been held accountable by now. Instead, I can only hope for the family's sake that the DNA recovered back in 1996 is still viable today. And Father John Ramsey also states that he does not blame local police for not being prepared to handle this kind of murder. But what he does have a problem with is instead of accepting help from external experts, they sat on the case and they would not accept that help because clearly it came down to their own ego versus actually solving this case. This case was a complete media circus from the beginning. I wonder why. The family had money, the little girl was blonde hair, blue-eyed, and white, so of course the world all cared about it. But still, here we are with no outcome. And if you're a fan of all things interesting and horrific, follow along because that's what I make videos on. When looking at crime scene photos, they didn't even put the police tape up facing the right direction. I mean, honestly, I can't help but question the caliber of the talent just based off that alone.